He had signed papers that ruined thousands of lives without blinking. But at 2:17 a.m., frozen in the back seat of his armored car, Alexander Vale realized his hands were shaking because a baby wouldn't stop crying. And for the first time in his life, money couldn't silence the sound. Alexander Vale was the kind of man people whispered about in elevators and cursed in break rooms. His name moved markets, crushed competitors, and decided whether entire neighborhoods lived or disappeared beneath glass towers. At 39, he was a self-made billionaire, sharp-suited, sharp-tongued, and utterly merciless. Empathy was a weakness he had burned out of himself years ago, right alongside sleep and hope. That night rain slammed against the city like an accusation. Alexander stared out the tinted window, reviewing documents on his tablet, final approvals for a demolition project scheduled for dawn. An old apartment complex, cheap rent, families who had nowhere else to go. He didn't care. Progress always required casualties. That was the story he told himself, the one that had kept him warm and empty for years. "Sir, we're rerouting," his driver said. "Accident up ahead." Alexander sighed, irritation flickering across his face. Time was the one thing he valued more than money. As the car slowed near a dark underpass, something cut through the rain, a sound thin and desperate, barely human. A cry. Not the sharp wail of annoyance Alexander associated with children in restaurants, but something raw, broken, the kind of cry that came from exhaustion, hunger, fear. "Did you hear that?" the driver asked. Alexander did hear it. He wanted to ignore it. He had ignored worse things in his life. But the sound clawed at him, tugging at something buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. Against his own will, he said, "Stop the car." The driver hesitated. "Sir, this area." "Stop the car." Rain soaked his Italian shoes as Alexander stepped out. Under the flickering streetlight, beside a pile of trash bags and soaked cardboard, he saw her, a baby, wrapped in a thin blanket, face red, fists trembling, crying as if the world had already failed her. No parents, no note, just a tiny life abandoned beneath concrete and shadow. Alexander stood there, heart pounding in a way business deals never caused. He told himself this wasn't his problem. He could call the police, social services, anyone else. That was the logical thing to do. Yet he didn't move. The baby's eyes opened, unfocused, and somehow landed on him. Her cry faltered for half a second as if she sensed him. Something cracked inside Alexander Vale. Memories surged, his own childhood, a cold apartment, a mother who worked until she collapsed, a father who never came back. He had sworn never to be powerless again, sworn never to need anyone. And yet here he was, kneeling in the rain, carefully lifting a baby whose heartbeat fluttered against his chest like a frightened bird. "She's freezing," the driver said softly, his tough voice suddenly unsure. Alexander wrapped his coat around the child without thinking. "We're not leaving her," he said. That single sentence, so small, so simple, was the first decision in decades that wasn't driven by profit. As the car pulled away, baby quiet in his arms, Alexander didn't know it yet. But the empire he had built on ruthlessness had just met its first, unstoppable force. And it weighed less than 10 pounds. Alexander Vale had conquered boardrooms and broken rivals, but standing in a hospital hallway at dawn, holding a baby who refused to let go of his finger, he faced the most terrifying truth of all. Love was the one thing he had never learned to control. The hospital lights were unforgiving, bright and sterile. Doctors asked questions Alexander didn't have answers to. No ID, no family, no history, just a child the nurses temporarily called Baby Hope. Hope. The word unsettled him. Days turned into weeks. Alexander meant to hand her over, truly he did. But every time he tried, Hope cried as if she recognized abandonment. She slept best against his chest, calmed instantly when he spoke, his deep voice softening without permission. The tabloids went wild. Ruthless billionaire secretly a father. His board was furious. His assistant warned him this distraction could cost him billions. Then came the reckoning. Alexander visited the apartment complex scheduled for demolition. For the first time, he walked through the hallways not as a predator, but as a man carrying a child. He saw peeling walls, yes, but also family photos, worn toys, a woman rocking a baby in a window. He froze. That woman could have been the mother who left hope beneath the bridge, tired, desperate, out of options. That night, Alexander didn't sleep. He canceled the demolition at dawn. His board revolted. Lawsuits followed. His stock plummeted. Rivals circled like vultures. For the first time, Alexander Vail was losing. And for the first time, he didn't regret it. He began funding shelters, then childcare centers, then affordable housing not as charity but as commitment. He showed up. He listened. He learned names. Hope grew. She smiled. She laughed. She reached for him every time he entered a room as if he were the safest place in the world. One evening, years later, Alexander sat on the floor of his penthouse, now cluttered with toys instead of trophies. Hope, now officially his daughter, curled into his lap and asked, "Papa, were you always kind?" The question hit harder than any hostile takeover. He swallowed. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm trying." She hugged him anyway. Alexander Vail never regained his old reputation. Some called him weak, others called him changed. He didn't care. Because the truth was simple and powerful. The man who once believed power meant never stopping, learned that real strength is knowing when to kneel, listen, and choose compassion, especially when no one is watching. And it all began with a crying baby who refused to be ignored. In the end, the billionaire didn't save the child. The child saved the man.